Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusril, the game is World of Warships, and this is a slightly unusual replay. It's from Wargaming. Yep, Nico Power, the US Wargaming community contributor, has fallen to the dark side. Cruiser drivers weep, for another of your number has embraced the destroyer. Ha ha ha. We have cookies, by the way. He's decided to start playing destroyers, and he put this replay up on the US forums asking for constructive criticism on his playstyle and any tips and advice that were going around. Fair enough, says I can get a video out of this, so let's see where we can go. We'll start with his setup. I've paused the action for a moment. Well, technically not paused, I've actually slowed it down to I think 1% time, so we might get some replay weirdness later on, but we'll just have to live with it. First and foremost, Consumables. He's gone full premium. In particular, he has gone premium damage control. Yes, yes, yes. Oh god, yes. No matter what ship you are driving, even if you have to rummage down the back of the sofa for the spare change, take premium damage control. The bigger the ship, the more important it is, because it will save you from things like burning, flooding, and if you're a destroyer, having your engine jump overboard at the first sign of trouble. Well, technically that's not quite true. The engine will still jump overboard, it just makes it that bit quicker to haul it back on board and stop it running away again. As far as the rest of his setup goes, camo, Nico, that is the New Year 2017 camo. It's got a little bit of a quirk, and it's the reason I've still got 250 of them sat in my harbour. It doesn't give the detection bonus. It's almost unique among the special camos in that, while the 200% free XP is extremely nice, you forfeit, in the case of Kamikaze, about 300 meters worth of detection, which is a bit of a problem in a ship that lives and dies on its stealth. I don't actually know whether that was an oversight by the developers, or if Nico just missed that line not being there in the camo's description when he swapped out Kamikaze's premium camo, but yeah, I would definitely switch to a different camo for subsequent games. Or wander around to the devs, bribe them with coffee and say, hey guys, can you put the 3% detection and 4% dispersion back onto the New Year's camo, please? Moving on up to the masts, we have got his signals, and I am going to disconnect the camera for a second to get a better look at these. So, let's see, where did I put... There we are. Okay, just zoom in for a second. So, here we are with the signal flags. Sierra Mike, this first one, top right here, that is always a solid pick for Kamikaze. 5% extra speed takes you up to just shy of 40 knots basic, and 42 point something with engine boost plugged in. Pretty much faster than everything else at tier 5. About the only thing that's going to seriously challenge you is aircraft and the tier 7 Russians, but, well, that's still pretty impressive. Papa from Solo Warrior, or just a lot of lockboxes, which is where I've been getting mine. I have never actually pulled up a Solo Warrior. The day I do will be, well, the day I have a very excited replay on YouTube. However, what you get here is another whack to free XP, so, yep, always good. Economics flags are never a bad thing if you've got the spare slots for them. And then we get to some of the flags that are a bit more questionable on a destroyer. India Delta, second lanyard from the right, bottom row, these two yellow flags here. Let's just pull the camera along a touch. There you go. So this one is weird because it boosts Repair Party. Kamikaze doesn't have Repair Party, so I hate to say it, Nico, that was a waste of a signal slot. Much the same can be said of November Yankee Setter 7. That, again, 5% anti-air. Technically, very technically, Kamikaze does benefit from having, actually no, it's 10% extra anti-air DPS. However, since Kamikaze's anti-air suite is a pair of rifle caliber machine guns on the bridge, no, I really wish I was making that up, it's 0.3 DPS extra at 1 kilometre. That is not going to even register with a carrier that's decided it wants some underage boat action. So, yeah, I would definitely not bother taking a relatively hard-to-get signal. Again, it's a hard achievement to get, Clear Sky, along with Solar Warrior, I would not waste it on Kamikaze. As much as she needs protection from any aircraft, she's still going to have to run to an anti-air cruiser or a carrier's fighter planes and yell at them to make the bad aircraft go away. Moving on to the inner portside signal yard. Zulu Hotel, 50% extra Commander XP. Yes, 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 definitely in these early stages. We'll come back to what I think you've got as your commander skills in a moment, but if I'm right and you are running a 6, 7, 8, 9 point captain, definitely run all the commander skill boosts you can get until you're up to 10 points and can get yourself Concealment Expert. Much the same goes for Dragon, which is 333% Commander XP, and then we have the last two flags that are a bit more questionable. India Yankee, 20% shorter fires. Woohoo. Not a bad choice. Never a bad choice on a ship if you've got the space for it. What I would note, however, is that because this is a destroyer with premium damage control, your cooldown on DamCon is typically about 40 seconds. So, as I say, not a bad choice, but maybe not a necessary one either if you're taking that much volume of fire, particularly in Kamikaze, a ship that relies on not being seen in the first place. Then, yeah, you could maybe have put that slot to something else. Last and most definitely least, let's just try and get the camera into place, it's a wee bit twitchy. We have this one. This is one you tend to see on the German battleships. It's Mike Yankee's SOC 6, which is 5% to your secondary stats. Kamikaze doesn't have secondaries. Just throwing that out there. You could happily dump that flag and it would literally make no difference to your in-game performance whatsoever. As for suggestions to replace some of these flags, well, as I say, if you lose India Delta, November Echo Set 7 and Mike Yankee SOC 6, that gives you 3 slots to work with. What I would suggest taking, if you have got the room for them, Victor Lima, Juliet Whiskey Una 1. Both of those boost your flooding chance on torpedoes. Juliet Whiskey Una 1 in particular comes off Liquidator, which is relatively easy to get compared to the Witherer required for Victor Lima. However, Juliet Whiskey Una 1 also boosts your detonation chance, which is a bit of a downer. So for your third slot, particularly if you're using rare flags like Dragon or Papa Papa, I would seriously recommend going for Juliet Charlie as your final 8th signal, just so you have a 0 detonation chance, because it is not a good idea to tempt RNGesus by loading up on rare and expensive camos and flags and signals, and then not taking Juliet Whiskey Una 1 because someone will start playing around with a match in your turrets and your magazines and giggling insanely. Also, while we're here, I'm assuming this is a custom thing you had one of the devs do for you. Look at it. Look at it. He's so cute. He's so cute. He's so cute. He's so cute. That absolutely won't be used for blackmail material later on. So, that gets us back to his setup. Let's get on with the game itself, and we've got a little bit of weirdness, courtesy of me mucking about the camera, but there we go. Okay, that's got the camera back into Nico's view. So, just winding down the cap. Matchmaking is pretty forgiving on this one, to be honest. Yes, it's a tier 7 game. Kamikaze is little honey badger of destroyer. It does not care. Tier 7 battleship, just a bigger health pool and a bigger damage score to run up with the Type 92s. The only ships he needs to be wary of, really, are the Fujin over on the enemy team, because that's basically a clone of Kamikaze. Chances are it is going to have full stealth and therefore better detection than him. Of the rest, nothing he really needs to worry about here. The only ships Kamikaze really needs to fear, like most Japanese destroyers, are carriers that can lock them down and keep them spotted, and radar-equipped ships like Atlanta, that was on his team thankfully, and Russian destroyers, because you can't outrun the Russians, especially not once you get up to around about tier 7 and you start getting the 42-knot monsters in the game. So, off we go. Towards point A, standard shakeout tactics for two brothers. Half the team's going left, half the team's going right. Nico is very sensibly making a charge for A to get an early cap. And, okay, here's something I would point out. Nico is going to go to the right around this island and use the, I suppose, natural approach to A is relatively good as a description. I tend to go left in this situation, just cut into A on a tangent, take a sharp left once I actually hit the circle, and skirt round the edge. One question I'm always asking myself when I'm playing destroyers seriously is, what's my escape route? If something pops up and detects me at this point, what is my immediate action to bail, break contact, and evade gunfire? If you go right on this map, you're pinned by this coastline at the large island, so you can only go left, and that makes you predictable. If you cut around the left of this island, you've got more options. You can still go left, break out into open water in the island chain, or you can do a sharp right and dive down the channel. It offers you basically more options. It makes you more unpredictable, and in a destroyer, unpredictability is one of your better weapons. I think it was Shigere's captain who commented that you never hit the same enemy the same way twice. That makes you predictable, and predictable gets you killed. Anyhow, Nico runs down the side of the island, dashes himself into A, and starts the cap. He does actually kick a little bit closer to the coast than I would. It's tempting to do this on Two Brothers. Again, this is a map-specific thing. But low headlands like this one don't block line of sight nearly as much as you think they would, and they certainly don't block artillery fire. So if you pin yourself up against a coastline like this, again, you're cutting your options if something unpleasant comes round the corner. And something unpleasant most definitely could come round the corner here, because if there's another destroyer barreling down towards A from the enemy side, Nico's running this high detection radius. He's running 6.2 kilometers. Now, part of that is the New Year's camo. Part of it is also that he's not got concealment expert on this captain. I mentioned earlier that getting up to 10 points was vital for a Japanese captain. That's why concealment expert and stealth camo on this destroyer gets you down to 5.4 kilometers. Not quite best in matchmaking. Isakaze can do 100 meters better, but still pretty good and still more than enough to get close with these 7-kilometer torpedoes that you're working with. However, luckily for Nico, the enemy destroyers don't seem too interested in trying to make an early grab for A. Nico spots a Nagato, N4 destruction over there, takes a quick glance around, doesn't see anybody, but dumps his smoke anyway. Now, this is either very, very clever or very, very stupid. Okay, you'll see we've got a salvo from the Nagato coming in. There's nothing there for it to hit, so of course it just rearranges the water a little. Pause the action again for a second. Here is one of the great truths of destroyer gameplay. Smoke screens attract attention, like nobody's business. If there are no British cruisers in the game, popping a smoke screen basically writes destroyer here to everybody within about a 20-kilometer radius of the smoke. And then you get artillery fire being blind fired into the smoke. You get torpedoes being fired through the smoke. You get lots and lots of unpleasant attention from anyone and everyone. Now, there are a few ways you can use this. In particular, if you dump a blind smoke like Nico's done, and then you scuttle out the side. So in this case, instead of turning back like Nico did, scuttle off to the west, the enemy are looking over here, they're unmasking to fire their guns, and they're relaying you all kinds of valuable information about their position and their course as a result. Except Nico can't do that because he's turned back into the smoke and he's blocked his own line of sight. And, well, torpedoes are potentially going to come through this smoke, and they're not going to stop. And they don't need line of sight at all. The other uses of smoke, of course, are as a panic button if you need to break detection fast, and to lay cover for heavier ships. And Nico now can't do either of these for 2.5 minutes, even with premium smoke. So, as I say, he was either very clever and neatly suckered a cruiser and a battleship into revealing their positions, or he's done something a little bit unwise and essentially wasted a smoke charge. And even with Superintendent and Premium Consumables for a total of 4, you don't necessarily have those charges to waste. However, as I said, the enemy destroyers don't really seem that interested in making a grab for A. We're going to see why later on, incidentally. But here comes another salvo. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, I think that's from the Nagato again. It's come from about the right bearing. Again, if Nico had scuttled out to the side of the smoke, he'd been able to get a positive spot on the Nagato when it fired. Okay, that's a second vessel. That was way too quick for a battleship to be firing. So we now know that there's definitely at least one more ship out there. Again, Nico's in the smoke, can't get the spotting data. Third ship, that could be the cruiser, could be the Nagato firing again. He's got the cap, which is something. Definitely, well, it doesn't definitely confirm that there are no destroyers on this flank, but it does confirm that they are being very, very slow to the party if they are actually there. So, Nico then does something a little bit odd and turns away. He breaks away from his circle. Realises, I think, that he's not going to make this turn to the right without hitting the island, so opts instead to run down the channel and loop round Nagato, bags first blood, sinks the enemy Leander. That, I believe, was actually over on the other side of the map, and yeah, it was. You can see the dead ship icon in D. Again, turn to port. I'm not quite sure what that was about. I think maybe he's looping around. This is something I still don't understand, even though I've looked at it half a dozen times. What I would have done would have been just to dive straight out to the west, hook up with the cruisers to provide them with smoke cover once the launcher recharged, or maybe start working up towards the Nagato and whatever that cruiser is to try to get torpedo shots. It takes Nico a little longer to do that, and he's out of position as a consequence. So for the next few minutes, there's actually not a lot he does. He just spends it trying to get in position. Meanwhile, over in Point B, the Gade, who pulled a gutsy and some would say extremely stupid move, is getting himself well and truly brutalised by, well, definitely the Graf Spee, and probably that lovely little cluster of red blips over in D7 and D8. Like I say, it was a gutsy move going through Suicide Alley to start with, but unfortunately it's not going to pay off. For a start, he has shot out the far side of his smoke. He misjudged the deceleration. And for another thing, even if he did, that's a German destroyer, he's firing, so M4 Destruction is picking him up, and even if he were actually completely on the far side of the smoke, he'd still be feeding spotting data to the Graf Spee, so Graf Spee just says thank you very much and blows him out of the water. Which brings us on to the next point about situational awareness. One thing you constantly have to do with the destroyer is have one eye on the minimap. What can have line of sight to you? What can detect you if you pull the trigger? And we're going to see another example of that in a few minutes. But for the moment, Nico, widespread on your torpedoes? Seriously, man? At this range? Just pause the action again for saying, look at this cone. That is the potential distribution of the torpedoes from your launcher. You get 2 of them per salvo. Look at the angle the Nagato is subtending. You're going to be lucky to score even 1 hit here, even if you empty the tubes. Generally, as a rule with torpedoes, particularly the IGN torpedoes, you tend to use narrow spreads, and if you do want to compensate for maneuvering, you shotgun the spreads either side of the lead indicator to manually spread the fish out. It's a lot simpler that way, and if you do feel like taking the high-risk shot, you just put them down the torpedo bearing, and truth be told, they'll probably miss, but the whole psychology of battleship drivers when it comes to torpedoes and somehow psychically predicting every maneuver that target ship is going to make in the next 30 seconds, yeah, you could write a whole book on that. Anyhow, let's crank the action back up. So Nico runs himself down, gets to 6.2. He's got a detection warning, and just flickered for a second. He's running just inside detection for that Nagato. Wouldn't be a problem if he'd had Concealment Expert and camo. In fact, he would only been detected now, since he's just kicked down to 5.4 kilometers. He might even have squeaked away with it, but he's got the fish in the water. He wasn't observed, except that this third salvo. Nico, that Pensacola was at 8 kilometers when you launched. Look at his course. He's heading away from you. He is never, in a month of Sundays, going to be in range of these 2 torpedoes. So that, I'm afraid, was a waste of ammunition. As a broad rule at this low tier, if the target's heading away from you, don't bother with the shot unless you practically jam the tubes up their backsides. The range is too short, the speed differential is too low. So, Nico is merrily watching the torpedoes come in. I do this plenty of times. It gets you some nice dramatic camera angles, gets you some wonderful oh please moments, and of course there's the satisfaction of watching a nice big damage number. No flooding, sadly, which, well, that might change with the rumoured revamp to flooding coming up. But in this view, it's all too easy to lose your situational awareness. And while Nico is watching these two ships pull the trigger on his guns, which is not necessarily a bad thing in a Japanese destroyer, but he does blow his cover in the process. You have to be a little bit careful when you're firing your guns. Generally, with Kamikaze, I restrict myself to... I restrict myself to fire either in self-defense or putting down a low-health target. So if this Pensacola had been a couple of kilometers closer and safely in range of the torpedoes, instantly, again, Nico, look at this guy's course vector. He's heading away from your torpedo launch, and he's out of range to start with. So again, these fish, they're never going to hit unless he does a complete 180 and comes back in. The problem with gunsight view is that while you get some very pretty pictures and some brilliant footage, it's murder on your situational awareness. I'm just gonna leave this situation here for 30 seconds or so. I'm going to ask you to see if you can spot what the imminent threat to Nico is at this point. Okay, anybody want to take a guess? Do I hear any prizes? The Pensacola? Well, he's got 10 8-inch guns, but he's got other things to think about, and since Nico does actually have priority target here, we know the Pensa's not locked onto him. Much the same goes for the Nagato over to the left. 7.6 kilometers, again, supplying spotting data, so Nico's position is compromised. But again, he's got other things to think about, the Fiji and the Königsberg. And I don't think the guns are pointed towards him. No, the threat that Nico is about to have to deal with hard is over here. Mutsuki-chan! Yes. This is what happened to the enemy destroyers. I think that Mutsuki, I don't know if he was AFK or something, but he seems to have spent most of the game run face first into this island. He's just got himself free, and Nico hasn't seen him. This is Nico's camera view. The only clue he's got that this Mutsuki is there is this little red arrow on the minimap. This is why you always keep one eye on your minimap. Frequently, that's the first warning of imminent trouble. Crank back into motion, and Nico is eyeing up the Pensacola. As I said, can't blame him. If the Pensa had been a bit closer, I'd have been taking those shots myself. Just put him down, make certain of it. He's going to burn, but hey, little extra damage. There's the lock-on warning. Now, again, that should have had Nico frantically glancing around trying to work out what was going on, because the Pensacola, well, the Pensacola isn't looking at him, so the lock-on's not coming from there. Nagato? No, still over there, still distracted by the Königsberg and the New Mexico. Mutsuki, however, well, Little Miss Denial is now at 2 kilometers. By torpedo standards, that is point-blank range. You're going to spot the moment, by the way, that Nico actually sees the Mutsuki. Let's just switch the camera around, crank up the speed, and in a couple of seconds... 1.7, 1.6, 1.5, and there you go. Nico finally spots the Mutsuki, but it's too late. The Mutsuki has launched its torpedoes. Is the corgi doomed? No. How do you mess that up? Seriously, oblivious target, less than a kilometer away, and you missed with your torpedo? Okay, fine. Of course, what the Mutsuki did was to aim at Nico rather than where Nico was going to be. This is also one of the circumstances in which you can happily justify firing a wide spread, because you only need one of these torpedoes to hit. They do 10, 11, 12,000 damage depending on the target. Mutsuki's only got 9.5k, so widespread, saturate the sea area. And this is how you kill a destroyer with torpedoes. 1, 2, and honestly, that third one just rearranges the wreckage. So Nico changes his underwear, gets back onto the Pensacola, and, well, while the Pensa has put the fire out, he's now comfortably in guns range, still isn't looking over. Nico gets the fire started. Torpedoes here are kind of a waste of ammo. The Pencer is not only going to burn before the torpedoes get there, a couple of regular gunshots would have finished him off as well, so there was no need to empty the number 1 tube at that stage. Not an issue with Kamikaze, she has a 45-second reload. When you're talking about Shimakaze or Yugumo that have a minute 30 plus, even 2 minutes on their tube reloads, then it's a bit more of an issue. Nagato, meanwhile, has finally closed to secondary range, and it's getting a little bit hot for Nico. He widespreads his torpedoes. Again, I would have narrow spreaded against a battleship at that range. Takes a fire. Little slow on the damage control, but can't blame him there. And let's just see. Yep, battleship is not turning, it's not maneuvering, it's too busy trying to get the various torpedoes and shells away. Unfortunately, he can't dodge Nico's torpedoes as a consequence, and down he goes. Always satisfying to drop a ship 2 tiers higher than you, with the suspicion that it really should have known better. Again, we're into a quiet phase of the battle here. The enemy Kongu has just wrecked Atlanta. That is what happens when Atlanta gets into a straight fight with a battleship. And since Nico's got nothing to shoot at for the moment, he's just toddling his merry way down to B, off to grab another control point and hopefully succeed where the Gade failed. I have absolutely no idea if I'm pronouncing that German destroyer's name correctly. Gade? Gaida? Gida? I have no idea. German audience, please let me know. German is not one of my strong suits. So, run down to B. Again, back to playing the objective. There really isn't much to say here. This is what destroyers do in domination. They hunt out objectives, they harass battleships, they terrorize the enemy cruisers, and occasionally they run from aircraft, which thankfully isn't a problem in this game. Force disposition is pretty even, although Nico's the only destroyer left on his team, so he is going to be a very high priority target. The Graf Spee is over there, you can see the Congo over there, there's a Leander as well. They're basically between B and D, trying to run a defensive strategy by the looks of it. Of course, capping B basically sent up a big signal flare saying last destroyer is over here somewhere. There's really nothing else it could be. Graf and Congo can both see the control point, they know there's nothing there. And then right as he hits the smoke, Nico gets spotted. Okay, what could it be? There's nothing in range. Well, yes there is. There's a kamikaze that's just popped up. Well, it's the Fujin actually. It's just popped up on the minimap. And any second now, there it is. 998 health left. The gun's around. Nico, I must admit, I would have taken the shot here. You're compromised anyway. You've got 2 ships locked onto you. Kill that Fujin quick and you could have saved yourself a bit of bother later on. Nico doesn't quite get the guns around in time, however, or he's trying for a torpedo shot. Fujin's own torpedoes whiz past. You see there he used narrow spreads, but he shotgunned the launch angle. He wasn't sure where Nico was going to go. Missed by a country mile, but he would have done with widespread as well. And now the Graf is at 5.7, so that smoke's not going to help unless he can get back into it. Again, I would have tried for a gunshot here, but because he did a 180, the guns are pointing pretty much entirely the wrong direction. Nico dives back into his smoke, being actually kind of clever. He's ducking in and out of the smoke. He's giving that Grushby just enough of a target to be tempting, and then, like a tease, he is diving back into the smoke and hiding himself from view. Graf's barreling in to try to stop the upstart destroyer from taking the cap. Fails, was never going to get there in time, and manages to dodge the torpedoes, but in doing so ends up right in front of an intact Kongo class. That's probably one of the Arpeggio Kongos, by the way. If you see a Kongo or a Miyoko with no camo, that's usually what it means. And, well, widespread. Nico very sensibly here does not risk firing a torpedo. If that Kongo turns to starboard, as it has done, then Nico would have cross-dropped his own battleship. Kongo, as a result, only eats 2 torpedoes from Graf, doesn't have to worry about some Type 92 friendlies, and then it's some burning love to finish off the Graf Spee. So, summary advice for Nico? Certainly, you need to tweak your camo and signal flag build. Lose the signal flags I tagged as useless, start looking at some of the alternatives. Switch the camo out for something that gives you that extra 300 meters of concealment. Get Concealment Expert on your captain as well. That'll get you down to 5.4 kilometers. Once you've done that, you can start getting a lot more aggressive. Definitely start using narrow spread on the torpedoes. You've got a quick reload on Kamikaze, so if you do miss, you're going to have another salvo in 40 seconds or less. And most importantly of all, watch your mini-map. That Mutsuki had you bang to rights, and if he hadn't clutched the shot, you would have been dead several minutes earlier in this battle. But other than that, that was actually a pretty solid performance. Until next time, I have been Yusril, and farewell.